In 1967 and 1968, my father was an intelligence officer for the U.S. Army in the Vietnam War. I never knew much about his experiences in Vietnam, so one day I sat down with him to see how much he would tell me about those days. It turns out he had a lot to say. Okay, this is Bob Ridpath, my dad, and my dad was a soldier with the U.S. Army for 20 years, and some of that time was in Vietnam, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that time period today. And so first, I want to just start with, where did you go to college? Tell us where you went to college and what year that was.
I graduated from Ripon College in 1960.
In 1960?
Yes.
And when you were in college, you were in the ROTC program.
I was in the ROTC program virtually for 4 years.
So you went in ROTC as a freshman?
As a freshman.
Did you go in, did you join ROTC after you got into Ripon, or did you go in knowing you were joining the ROTC program?
I didn't even know about the ROTC program until I got to college. What I did know is that that was an era of the draft, and that if I was going to be in the Army, I wanted to go in as an officer. So I decided that I would go through the ROTC program. I never really intended to make a career out of it. That was just, at that time I thought it would either be 6 months, 2 years, or 3 years, and then I would be done with my commitment. That was where it stood in 1960. 56.
In 1956. We don't, ROTC is not something that is real common today. So just tell us a little bit about what ROTC was. Well, I guess still is, but what exactly is ROTC?
Well, ROTC stands for Reserve Officer Training. Training something, I don't know. But anyway, the purpose was to train a college student, college graduate eventually, to be an officer in the Army. So it was not something that you did all day. I mean, I took the regular classes, curriculum of foreign language and economics and history and that. But we also went to classes on how to be an officer in the Army.
Did you get paid for being in
ROTC?
ROTC?
Yes, you did. You got paid. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't. It seemed to be like it was like $28 a day or something like that. But I can't remember what it was. But we did get paid. In fact, it helped me get through college. I mean,
so it wasn't like it's just a credit towards your tuition. It was a pay, like
it was
paycheck.
A pay. You were paid. Not much, but you were paid.
So this was the time period of the draft, you said, and they were drafting people to go into Vietnam. So you had the idea that one way or the other, you had a good chance of going to Vietnam. And so if you were going to go to Vietnam, you wanted to go as an officer.
No, not quite. If I was going to go in the Army, I wanted to go as an officer, because Vietnam in 1960 really was not a big part of it. I mean, Vietnam was later.
Okay, so Vietnam wasn't part of your thought process really at all. It was, they're drafting people to go into the military, to go into the Army, so if I'm going to end up in the Army, then I want to go in as an officer.
Right.
Okay. So you were in ROTC, and then you graduated, and you go into the Army right after graduation. So, but at this point, you're not really. At what point does Vietnam come into your mind as there's a possibility that I'm going to Vietnam?
Yeah.
Well, what year did you graduate from college then?
1960.
1960.
And it was 9 months later before I actually became a member of the Army. Beth and I were married in 1960 also, September of 60, and then I worked I couldn't get a really good job because I had a military commitment.
You had 9 months to kill.
I had 9 months, and so when we were married, we lived in Chicago, and then entered the Army, as you say, 9 months later in 1961. And Vietnam was not really going on at that time, but I tell you, it escalated pretty quickly. But Vietnam had no bearing on my decision to do this, to stay in the Army. So then we went to Fort Riley, Kansas after we were married as our first stop, second stop, and that was where the decision was made that I would stay in the Army.
Decision by you and
Beth
and Mom.
Right. I interviewed for jobs. In fact, I had a job offer from one of the steel companies in Pittsburgh. And one of the questions that the interviewer asked me, he said, I believe I did this in Kansas City, if I'm recalling where it was. But anyway, he said, let me ask you this, Mr. Ridpath, would you be willing to work in Pittsburgh? Would that appeal to you? And I said, no, I don't want any part of that.
So you didn't want to be a Steelers fan.
So I didn't want to be a Steelers fan, and I didn't want to do that. So
they had 6 Super Bowls.
Right. So anyway, I didn't take a
Steelers.
So I didn't want to be a